again when you
Recording in progress. So, Brother Tom, I'm happy to have you back.
good to
I
be
like,
back.
yeah, I like our discussion, and you've been telling me about your life before, but today it's like the picture is becoming more clearer than those times when you talk about your life, and yeah. So, I would like to ask you about this mission issue. Looking at the the style of life you were living, and then later on you came to tell your wife, Carrie, that we will go into mission. Can you please explain how did this dream, how did this vision come to you?
Okay, all right. Well, to clarify, just for interest,
Yeah.
both Kerry and myself were called to missions at the same time in a different country.
Hmm.
And for Kerry, it was a response to hearing an evangelist at the church, and she felt God just call her to commit her life to God. And she went out to the altar and she committed her life to serving God. And she actually wanted to be a nurse or something like that and go and serve in a foreign country as a nurse in a mission situation. So for Kerry, it was a defined moment. Like she was in a church situation, heard the preaching, uh, the Holy Spirit tugged on her heart, and she responded and went out to the altar call. So that was for Kerry.
Hmm.
Now, for me, it wasn't that dramatic and that singular. So I have to tell a little bit of a story if that's okay. So what happened was when my parents and me and my sister and my brother, we arrived in New Guinea, uh, they had to wait for a small time before they actually went out onto the mission field themselves.
Hmm.
And we were living with my sister and my brother-in-law um, in this village, and he was a high school teacher.
Hmm.
And he also was a wonderful Christian man, and he was a very artistic man. He also ran a printing press,
Hmm.
and he did photography, and he did this with the students as well, and they published different things on this printing press. And I coming out from England, um, I was like not a Christian. Okay, I was rebellious. I was not interested in God. I was, you know, even at that young age. When I went to Hong Kong, we stopped in Hong Kong on the journey, and I took my cigarettes out of my pocket. And here I am, like 14 years old, okay, 14 and a half or something. Took these cigarettes out of my pocket and I threw them in the rubbish bin.
Wow.
And I said, I'm leaving England. I'm leaving all that I know back there. I'm going to start a new life. And I really gave my life back to God in that room by myself as I threw those cigarettes in the rubbish bin. So when I got to New Guinea, we arrived at New Guinea. It was like I was like a fresh Christian. Let me tell you some more of this story because it's quite interesting. Well, I think it's interesting.
Hmm.
I hope your viewers find it interesting too. But as a young boy, I was baptized in water and filled with the Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
Before it may be age 9, 10 years old of age, but during those few years of rebellion, that all disappeared. When I committed my life back to Christ in Hong Kong, when I got to New Guinea, the Holy Spirit, I just spoke in tongues immediately. Again, it was like I was just back to where I was before. God, the Holy Spirit had never left me. God had never left me.
Hmm.
The only person who had left anybody was me. God had never gone away. Holy Spirit had never gone away. I was the one who'd removed myself. And here I am. I'd come back to God, and suddenly, boom, the Holy Spirit was there. I was speaking in tongues. God was giving me revelation. I was like a brand new Christian. I was all excited. And my brother in law was making these little tracts to send out to the villages, a little message, gospel message. And he asked me if I'd like to write one. So I said, yes, I'd love to write this tract. So I wrote this little tract and I put some pictures in it and we printed it off. and these tracts went all around the villages in New Guinea that I'd written. And it was at those times that God put a seed in my heart to be a missionary. Now, I didn't get a revelation to say, Tom, you're going to be a missionary, but something happened when I was in that foreign country writing this little gospel tract, and it was going out into the villages, and people were getting saved, reading those little scriptures and things. Something happened inside of me. Something was put in there that, I didn't know at the time. But as I kept walking through in my Christian life, the picture became clearer.
I see.
And that's why I can say to Kerry, I feel God's called me. I know God's called me to be a missionary. I didn't hear the call. It wasn't written in the sky. I didn't have a vision, a revelation. Just somehow the Holy Spirit just implanted it into my heart. During those experiences in New Guinea, it was only because I was in New Guinea at the time, and I was like a fresh, bubbly Christian, just come back to God. I remember, let me tell you something really strange, because it was just the way it was. It was wonderful. I was praying in the Holy Spirit and having some times with God by myself, just me, no, nothing else. And I prayed in tongues, fervently, passionately praying in tongues. And I said, God, what was all that about? And God gave me the interpretation. And I prayed the interpretation out in English. And I went, wow, that's pretty good. Here I am, 14 and a half, having this revival with God in New Guinea, And I went to my dad and said, Dad, this just happened. And my dad went, oh, no, you can't do that. Well, sorry, but it just happened, Might not be your theology or your understanding. I mean, he was a Pentecostal Christian, but he just couldn't work it out. And he went, oh, you can't do that. I said, why not? I spoke in tongues I didn't understand. I asked God for what it said, and he told me what it said, and I spoke it out. So, at 14 and a half, God had already put something in my spirit for the ministry that I was going to go into in the years ahead as well. I never dreamed I would be a preacher, praying over people, prophesying. I never knew that. Didn't have a clue. But somehow God, he filled me with his spirit and his power. He had a plan for my life that I never even understood. And these things were taking place in my life, and it was incredible. It was amazing. And so, when I came to Kerry and we said, look, this is what I feel, and this is why I feel it. It was a growing awareness of a call.
I see.
So, and the more I walked in the years ahead, the more I stepped in that journey, the more it became clearer.
I see.
And the call became, I understood it was a call for missions. I understood that. And, when missions people came to our church, my heart used to just go out. I'd be on the plane back to their country with them. That's such a pull for missions. So it became absolutely clear, without a doubt.
I see.
And that's empowered our lives for what, 40 years? Empowered our lives for 40 years.
I see. So what I do realize from your calling is that God was always creating the condition for you, or the situation for you to respond. Like for example, he made your parents to move from England to New Guinea, right?
Yeah.
And then during that time, you were like 14 and a half year old.
Yeah.
And then you decided, since I'm not leaving England to another place, I'm going to stop smoking.
Yeah.
Good. And then the next time was when this person was, going to do evangelism, and you decided to help with the tract.
Yeah. Well, I was learning how to use the printing machine.
Yeah.
It was such a wonderful experience,
Yeah. So I can see God in the process.
Yes, for sure.
And you were just like responding and responding and responding as the
I
process.
was just like young and open for new ideas and hungry for God. And like, I'd grown up in high school where it was hard work and horrible and problems. And when I got to New Guinea, my brother-in-law, because he was such an amazing man, he treated me like an adult. He treated me like somebody of worth. And he showed me how to run the printing machine and how to put the ink in it and how to get the images. So he taught me all that, and I learned it very quickly. And then I was doing that printing myself as well as making the book. I was actually printing them. So it was an amazing thing because I never knew I could learn anything. I had difficulties writing and reading, but to be doing something like this was like, wow, this is really amazing.
Good. All right, Brother Tom. So this brings us to the end of part three. We still have two more parts to go. So we will stop here so that we can begin with part four. Now,
Okay.
yeah, now I have gotten the clear picture of how this calling, or your calling to the ministry, or wanting to be a missionary, to be on the mission field came about. Thank you very much, and let's switch to part four.